So here's what I know. Your church exists for people. You want to see people saved, baptized, take steps of faith, and ultimately grow closer to Jesus. And yet at the same time, most of us feel uneasy or uncomfortable talking about the need and the desire to grow our church to see more people actually meet Jesus. And so today in Practical Church Planting, we're actually going to give you 4 reasons why your church shouldn't apologize for reaching more people.
Well, welcome back to Practical Church Planting, where in 15 minutes or less, we'll give you practical tips, advice, and encouragement to help you plant and grow healthy churches. My name is Brandon Drozy, and joining me is Dylan Dotson, and today we're talking about 4 reasons why your church shouldn't apologize for reaching more people.
So all of us most of us probably want to grow our church, and not necessarily in a bad way. We're not trying to say like big mega church, massive thousands of people, but I think all of us would like to see more people meet Jesus, and part of that is why you're in ministry is to make it possible for that. And if more people are coming and joining and connecting in your church, that's probably happening.
Right.
And so at the same time, sometimes it can be hard as a leader to talk about growth and reaching more people because all of the negative connotations, your heart's not in the right place. It's all about ego. Is it just about people, reaching people, not about growing them closer to Jesus? Mm-hmm. And so in this episode, we want to give you 4 things to consider as to why when we say you shouldn't apologize, we're not saying you should just run people over and say, how dare you ask? But we would maybe encourage you to be more open and honest with your people about wanting to reach more people.
Sure.
And here are 4 reasons why. Number 1 is that people play harder when somebody is keeping score. And what we simply mean is this, that if you're playing a basketball game or whatever with your friends and nobody's keeping score, you're just kind of running back and forth, it's whatever. As soon as you start keeping score, now you might not be any better of a basketball player, but you will try harder.
Sure.
Because it's just human nature to want to win. And I think sometimes we get frustrated at the lack of growth at our churches or the lack of people living on mission or whatever because we're not encouraging and talking about it. Mm-hmm. I guarantee you that if you talk about our desire to reach more people, you'll see a culture shift, and it may take time, of people actually wanting to do this. And so if you say, hey, here's our goal, not necessarily you have to give a number, right, but just be open and honest about here's why we exist, here's why we want to reach more people, and we say we want to do this. Like we want to reach more people so people can see Jesus. If people know that is a value, that is something that you want to do, that is something that is good for them to do, you're much more likely to see people actually do it.
Yeah, there's I've got a story and I'm totally going to destroy it, so get ready. I remember hearing a story about studies that were done on runners that if they just set professional runners out and had them run a distance that they would run fast, run X amount, whatever time. But then if they knew they were timed, even though they were tired the next round, they'd run even faster. And then if they put someone next to them, they'd run even faster because they were racing against somebody. And so just knowing kind of the goal or knowing all the details of it. It's why fundraisers, whenever you participate in a fundraiser, why they give updates and things like that. Because people want to know people want to work together towards something, I guess you could say.
And full disclosure, we started doing this year at New City Church for the first time. Mm-hmm. Like actually saying, and I think we might have talked about some previous episodes, I'm not sure, about why we're wanting to do this. And we've actually, we're 4 months into it now. Like we, just had Easter or whatever. Like we've actually had people who have talked about, so for us, it's called our Just One campaign, being intentional with just one person. Yep. And we've actually seen people do that and be excited about it. Like just this Easter alone, 2 people told me that their Just One was here.
Yep.
1 person told me in front of their Just One. Like,
really?
I was like, okay,
awesome.
Maybe she, obviously they've had conversations about Jesus because I don't think she would say, this is the person I'm investing in.
Yeah.
And I would say the reason we did this is not, for us, we have a specific number in mind by the end of the year, but the goal is not the number. The goal is for those conversations that I got to have on Easter, was that people were saying, I am being intentional. And if we were not talking about it, people would not be nearly as intentional as they are if they didn't know there was a scoreboard attached to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, a lot of I've heard the same thing, especially in our community groups, things like that. And a lot of people I hear from are people who have been in church for a long time, who know to invite people. Like it's not a new concept to them, but just the fact that there's everyone's kind of rallying behind it. People are excited about it. I talked to my Just One today, and that that's what we're calling it. And I don't know, putting something behind it makes people do some. Hang on, it's coming to me. Makes people that know that this is the right thing to do, actually do it instead of just talking about it.
And the last thing on this, and we'll get to the next point, is I think, again, people just need to be encouraged and know. I think when we talk about reaching more people, oftentimes people think that is the church leader's job or that people will just show up. But if you say, no, we want you to play your part. And if all of us play our part together, that's when we'll actually see more people meet Jesus. And so I think for us, what we're seeing is that because we're telling people very often, why we're wanting to reach more people and what the goal is behind it, they're saying, oh, I understand what I can do. I can't reach 15 people, but I can reach one.
Yeah.
And so when people know that that's a priority, they're much more likely to do it. Number 2, not wanting to reach people violates one of the greatest commandments, right? The Great Commission.
Woo.
Go out and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them, teaching them, all of that great stuff. Mm-hmm. Well, you can't do it if you're not reaching more people. And I think sometimes we get really defensive and we say, well, it's just about, you're just about numbers and you're just about growth and you're about being, you don't want to be deep. You just want about people. Well, that's what Jesus told us to do. So if we receive, again, we want to do this in a loving way, but we want to tell people if we're not doing that, or if that's not a priority for us, what are we even doing? Because Jesus literally said, go and do this. So we shouldn't apologize for therefore going and doing it.
This is the reason that it's always confused me when church leaders kind of argue against this. Like I understand, and I don't want to minimize it. There's totally been examples of people who have taken this too far and run over people and run people out, and that's totally legitimate. But for church leaders who look down on other church leaders who are for just wanting to grow and say that it's all about these other things, when in reality, I mean, that's kind of, I mean, I don't see any ill will of trying to reach people.
And I think, again, putting it in that frame, and I get it's hard because people like familiarity, people like what they know, but it's us not remembering what the most important thing is, which is the mission. And if we tell people, not only is this a neutral thing, like growth is either for it or it's like your cup of tea or it's not, it's actually a direct violation of what Jesus called us to do. Like that's why we're here. And so you want to reach more people. Now, I would say this, what if you're one of those people that are like, well, I don't want to have a big mega church? Most people aren't going to have a big mega church. Like we see social media, we think that's a normal thing. Like it's probably not going to happen to you or to me anyway.
Not anything to worry about.
But number 2, if you're worried about it, you know what you do? You invest in church planting. That's what you do. You reach more people. And if you're a church that actually cares about church planting, people are going to be much more apt to want to see their church grow because it's not about hoarding a bunch of people. It's about sending them out. So that's another episode for another day.
That's my favorite thing is when people are like, I don't want to accidentally have a mega church. Like it's just going to like,
And number 1, you will not accidentally have one. And number 2, you can plant churches if your church is getting too big. Yeah. That's a great thing. So not wanting to reach people violates one of the greatest commandments, is why we should not apologize for wanting to actually do it and not violate the commandment. Number 3, the only reason that any of us follow Jesus is because God used people, used churches to reach us. Again, we get so used to my community, I like this, I don't want things to change, that we forget that that's exactly how God used people to reach you. That by you coming to Jesus, you joined the universal church. By you joining the church that you're a part of today, like you haven't always been a part of this church. Maybe you grew up in the church, but that's becoming increasingly more rare that you actually stay where you are forever. And if you did, that's awesome. That's not most people's stories. Mm-hmm. Like the reason you're there is because you joined the church, so you somehow grew that church at some point when you came.
Right. Yeah. I mean, exactly. I don't have much to add. I mean, if you're okay with the church reaching out to you, then you should be okay with in turn reaching out to others.
Right. So again, number 3, the only reason any of us follow Jesus is because God used people to reach us, which again is something that we need to remind our people about when we talk about wanting to reach more people, is that this is what happened to you. Again, I think sometimes people get defensive, they get upset because they don't understand why something's happening. They don't understand the point, and then we just forget. We're forgetful people. Yeah. I think if you say, hey, this violates Jesus' greatest commandment not to do it, and this is how you were reached and affected and impacted, people say, oh, that's right. I need to go there and do it for other people.
Right.
And then number 4, keeping the mission the priority reduces consumerism and complaining. Right? If you know what the scoreboard is, for example, then the main priority is winning. Now, again, I know it's delicate to use that word in church, but like, for example, in a war zone, right? Like people that live in a war zone that are overseas fighting in an American context, so typically you think of the Middle East. You think of their living situation is not the best. They don't have all the modern comforts of home, but yet that's not what they're complaining about. They're trying to get in, do their job safely so that they can come home because there's something else that's more important. And so what happens is when you start arguing about the color of the carpet and the paint on the walls and when a light gets changed, it's because you're bored and not doing anything. Yep. And so if you keep the mission the priority, people are going to be much more focused on that as opposed to the things that don't really matter.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just keeping your eye on the most important thing.
Right.
And the most important thing isn't what affects you.
Right.
It's what affects other people, essentially.
Right. And so again, it's just talking about it, because if you're upset that people are maybe more consumeristic or there's a lot of complaining in your church, the question is, are you guys living on mission Probably not. And so what can we do to start steering the ship in the right direction?
Yeah, and one thing to add to that is I think you hear a lot of complaints of people saying that their church is like that, when in reality there's going to be people who are just this way because they're this way. But a lot of it comes down from leadership.
Right.
So if your whole church is kind of developing this culture of complaining and just consuming and all about themselves, really it starts by looking at the church itself and then seeing what the church is doing to reinforce it.
Brian, you're setting me so well for the one caveat to all of this.
Here
so again, number 4, keeping the mission the priority reduces consumerism and complaining. Here's the one caveat of all of this. If you're a church leader, pastor in ministry, on staff, and you're listening to this, it is your job to lead.
Yes.
So often you get around people in ministry and all they're doing is complaining that our people don't do this and this isn't happening. People are just complaining. I'm just like, who's in charge here?
Yeah.
Like, who's leading here? Your job, if you're a ministry leader, is to be spiritually mature, is to be growing closer to Jesus, and is to be leading other people to do the same thing. So as the leader, you're going to run into frustrations because you're the one doing the leading. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, while there are always going to be complaints, while there's always going to be pushback, if you're not the culture is created from the leaders. Like it just is. Period. If you don't like the culture, it starts with you and it starts with me. And so we've got to do something about it, which means that we need to explain why we do what we do. So often in church world, right, we think about something, pray about something for months, then we announce to the church that we're doing it. They had no idea, and then we get mad that they have all these questions, and they're not quite sure they want to do it, which is where you were 3 months ago when you started the process of thinking about what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And so if you're leading, you have to be okay with that. You have to not get defensive when people ask questions. You have to explain the why. Even if not everyone gets on board or if everyone agrees, if people at least know why you're doing something, they at least think, oh, they actually thought this through. I'm not sure if I like the reason, but I'm going to go with it because I can see that they care. They just kind of make a decision on the fly, which we don't make decisions on the fly, but sometimes we present them as that.
Right.
And so if you want people to get on board with this, you and I have to talk about reaching more people. We have to talk about growth so that it's not an awkward thing. It's on us to lead.
Right. And at the end of the day, some people are going to take longer to come around than others.
Yep.
And some people are never going to come around, if we're being honest, because at the end of the day, we're people and we're flawed and we're humans. And so it's not a matter of just only focusing on the ones that are behind your mission, or the mission, but behind the way you want to go forward, and leaving to the side or whatever, leaving away the, what's the word? Leaving. I
don't know what the word is,
whatever.
Brian.
Leaving away the people that don't agree with you, but including them, and even if they don't fully back you, but still involving them, and maybe eventually they will come around.
And here's the thing about this. I feel like talking about church growth is a lot like talking about money. Yeah. We feel like we've talked about this in previous episodes. Mm-hmm. We feel like we can't talk about money, and we apologize every time we talk about money. So then people think like money is a bad thing. Yeah. And so here at New City Church, we talk about money a lot. One of our 4 values, which I don't know if you can see it. If you're watching this, it's behind my head. If you watch the video version of it, I don't know, but they're hanging up. Is grateful people give. It is a financial value. We talk about it all the time, so much so that I don't think people would think we actually talk about it a lot because it's not an awkward thing. We just say it's what we do. It's good for us. It shows that we're trusting Jesus. And I think what happens is we talk about growth in an apologetic way, like we're sorry, or we have to caveat it a million ways, where so people begin to think, oh, maybe there is something wrong with this, as opposed to if it's just a normal thing that we talk about, it's no longer awkward and it's no longer taboo. Yeah,
and I one thing I think is funny is if you're this, you can especially tell us in a smaller church, but if you have a Sunday like Easter where it's bigger and there's more people there and there's more new people, you'll get a lot of comments of, today wasn't, there's a lot of people there today, in a positive way. Yep. And so I don't know why we have this in our mind that we have to, like, obviously our people want it to be bigger. Doesn't mean they want it to be huge, but people like seeing growth. Yep. And so we don't need to apologize by saying we want to grow, because that, in reality, that's what most people actually want.
Right. And again, this is just our personal experience here at New Cities. You can take it or leave it. Our financial value has been a part of it since day one. So we've always talked about money. Not a big deal. Nobody complains. I think people it's what you do if you follow Jesus. Yeah. That's what we want this to do about growing, about reaching people. So again, this year we started our Just One campaign, and it's become just like a normal, like I was so nervous. Yeah. Kind of not nervous because some certain things happened to me to make us want to do this, but also at the same time nervous. Mm-hmm. And it's only like 3 or 4 months in, and most people are like, this is just what we do. I've had probably less than 5 conversations of people who were concerned. Mm-hmm. And I've probably, and not everyone's going to talk to me about it. Yeah. And we're about 130, 140 people-ish on a Sunday, whatever. I've only had one serious conversation with someone that was like, I'm not sure that I can get on board with this. Turns out, after 3 conversations with it, they are on board with it now. And even if they weren't, they were still coming because at least they got to hear our heart as to why we were doing what we were doing.
Right.
Again, it's our job to lead. That's the point. So again, 4 reasons why your church shouldn't apologize for reaching more people. People play harder when someone is keeping score. Not wanting to reach people violates one of the greatest commandments. The only reason any of us follow Jesus is because God used people to reach us. And lastly, keeping the mission the priority reduces consumerism and complaining. So thanks for being with us today on Practical Church Planting. As always, practicalplanting.com/questions if you have something you want us to talk about in a future episode. And we'll see you next time on Practical Church Planting. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Practical Church Planting. Whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Practical Planting, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, make sure you like or subscribe or do whatever it's telling you to do or should do on that platform.
And hey, if you are so tired of looking at our ugly faces, but you're not tired of listening to our beautiful voices, then you can find our podcast if you just search Practical Church Planting on iTunes or Google Play. Make sure not to just find it, not just to listen, but to subscribe.
Make sure you subscribe. Brian, tell them to subscribe.
Subscribe.
See you next time.